Hi there, welcome to Recap City. Today, I am going to share a 2001 American black comedy movie titled Bubble Boy. Warning, spoilers ahead. Enjoy watching. Jimmy Livingston is a boy who's born with no immunity of any kind. He has to be put in isolation because even a small germ can harm him. Everything he wishes to touch must be decontaminated first. This causes him to live all his life in a bubble-like sphere that his parents made for him. Mrs. Livingston is his overprotective mother. It was when he became 4 years old that he was allowed to come home. When he turned 4, Mrs. and Mr. Livingston bring their little boy home in a portable bubble. In his room, they made a huge bubble where he can play and move freely. To interact with their son, they are using a pair of protruded hands to be able to touch him. All his toys are decontaminated to be free of the smallest germs and they are kept inside the bubble. Jimmy has lived in the bubble room ever since. Mrs. Livingstone does not want him to leave the bubble, the reason why every bedtime story that she reads to him ends with the princess dying because we're let free. Mrs. Livingstone also lets him watch one TV channel and read one magazine because she says that they are the only ones ever made. She also uses the protruded arms to cut his hair and hug her son. Being an extreme nationalist, Mrs. Livingstone only teaches Jimmy things she thinks are reasonable and she also forces her ideas on him. And poor Jimmy goes along with it because he doesn't know better. The unique bubble boy is quite popular in the city and everyone knows it, but it doesn't work to his advantage. The neighbor kids are making fun of him by wrapping themselves with plastic, but Mrs. Livingstone chases them away frequently. Homemade foods are the only food Jimmy eats that are prepared by his mother. The bubble has a decontamination system that allows Mrs. Livingstone to put his food to kill the germs before Jimmy can eat them. Years passed, and Jimmy is now 16 years old. He believes that he grew up just like any other normal kid. He was very happy when he received an electric guitar instead of a car. But one day, while cleaning his window he saw Chloe, a new girl his age moving into his neighborhood. He obviously likes her, but cannot do anything about it. And he grew up inside a bubble, that's why he doesn't know anything about love or girls. His mother senses his admiration for Chloe and reads him the story of a boy who died who touched the next-door whore. Jimmy's infatuation with Chloe is growing as the days pass, but he can only watch her through his window. And sometimes, Chloe notices him watching her. He knows that something is happening to him, which he has never experienced before. One morning, he was terrified when he woke up with an erection. Unfamiliar with the concept, he hits himself with a bat, then he cries and calls his mother. His mother comes in and made him recite the Pledge of Allegiance, making him calm down. Chloe's popular group of friends makes fun of Jimmy, calling him the bubble boy, and she seems to be defensive towards him. One day, Chloe decided to knock on the Livingston's door and Mr. Livingston lets her in. She was fascinated when she saw the bubble system of plastic tubes all around the house. She then reached Jimmy's room after following the tubes. The only woman Jimmy had talked to is his mother, that's why he was surprised and got nervous when he saw Chloe. Chloe then started a conversation by telling him she likes the guitar. Using the protruded hands, Jimmy tries teaching Chloe to play the guitar. After feeling something on him, he starts reciting the Pledge of Allegiance in the middle of it. After that day, they hang out almost every day. But it seems like Mrs. Livingstone is against their friendship but cannot do anything about it. In the next scene, a montage of the fun things they did together follows. She gives him a guinea pig inside a ball for his birthday, and even brings kids inside his room for Halloween. One night, on her birthday, a drunk Chloe sneaks inside Jimmy's room through the windows. She tries getting inside the bubble, claiming she cannot stay away from him anymore. However, she passes out before she can go in. The scene cuts to Chloe's prom night. Her perverted boyfriend, Mark, comes to pick her up and Jimmy is devastated. Mark offers Jimmy a cigarette but he doesn't know what it is. One night, Jimmy sees Mark and Chloe make out through his windows. The very next day, Chloe comes into Jimmy's room and shows him her engagement ring. Mark had proposed to her to marry him. Their marriage is this weekend at Niagara Falls, and she has come to inform Jimmy. Jimmy is disappointed but doesn't show it on his face. She has also brought him a gift, which she keeps inside his decontamination tube, but Jimmy ignores it. Instead, he gives her the guinea pig back and asks her to go away. Chloe leaves with tears in her eyes. Later, Jimmy opens the gift and sees it is a snow globe with, "I love you," written inside. Surprised, he screams her name and decides to go to Niagara Falls to stop the wedding. He works hard to make himself a portable bubble shield and is finally successful. Then, he sneaks out of the house without his parents knowing. Jimmy is happy to be running for the first time. He reaches the bus station and asks the person there for a bus ticket. However, Jimmy has forgotten to bring any money. Distressed, he tries to cross the road when he is hit by a bus. He goes flying to the ground, but his bubble saves him. The people from the bus come out and offer to give him a ride. Jimmy happily accepts it, but he gets to know that the people are part of a religious cult. When he points it out, they angrily throw him out of the bus. The cult group reaches their destination, where their leader announces a round man inside a globe to be the savior sent by God. The group realizes that Jimmy was their savior, and sets off to look for him to take him out of the globe. Meanwhile, Jimmy meets a biker named Slim. Jimmy tells him about the love of his life marrying someone else. Slim is impressed, and in turn, tells him of his old girlfriend who he still loves named Wildfire. He then offers Jimmy a ride, and both of them make their way to Niagara Falls. At home, Mrs. Livingston finds Jimmy missing and freaks out. Mrs. Livingston and her husband set out to look for Jimmy because the police would only do it after 24 hours of the disappearance. Elsewhere, Slim and Jimmy reach Vegas and stop to rest. They have a lot of fun at a casino, but Jimmy only has 2 days before the wedding. So, he leaves Slim at the club, steals a scooter, and runs away in it. After traveling for a while, Jimmy comes across his parents' car and tries to stop him from running. In a hurry, Jimmy gets into an accident. But thankfully, his bubble bounces him into a running train. He escapes his mother but is now trapped in a train with talents from a freak show. The freaks tell him about their boss, Dr. Freak, who keeps them captured and uses them in his freak show. Jimmy meets Dr. Freak, who happens to be a dwarf. He accidentally throws the man to the ground with his bubble and frees the other freaks. Then he continues his way to Niagara Falls, but he can hardly use a scooter anymore, so he goes to a restaurant to ask someone for a ride. There, a bunch of police officers bullies a man named Push Pop. When Jimmy tells them he has no immunity, they assume Jimmy has a contagious disease, and run away from the place. The restaurant catches on fire in the chaos, and Push Pop offers Jimmy a ride. He also agrees to take him to Niagara Falls. Somewhere else, Mrs. Livingston reaches Dr. Freak, who tells her that Jimmy is going to Niagara Falls. Furious, she calls Chloe and yells at her for making Jimmy run away. As she talks to Dr. Freak, the freaks outside steal her car. Push Pop and Jimmy are on their way when they hit a cow in the middle of the road. Push Pop is distressed because, in his religion, cows are a symbol of God, but following his mother's word, Jimmy tells him that his religion is false. This offends Push Pop, so he leaves Jimmy on his own. Jimmy then somehow reaches New York. He asks for a ride from an old man named Pippi, to which he agrees. Jimmy wakes up the next morning and the man is still driving the car. Jimmy soon realizes that Pippi is lying lifeless, and the car hits a billboard. Jimmy goes into a grocery store and calls Chloe. Mark picks up the phone and tells Jimmy to give up because he is about to marry Chloe in an hour. He is now hopeless, so he calls his mother and asks her to come to pick him up. Both his parents drive to him and get him inside the car. Mrs. Livingston goes to the washroom and Mr. Livingston asks Jimmy how it felt to be outside for the first time. The father and son bond. Mr. Livingston tells Jimmy to not give up before trying. Taking his words, Jimmy runs to stop the wedding. Mrs. Livingston sees this and follows him in their car. At the same time, the cult group finds Jimmy and follows him as well. Slim, with his biker friends, comes to rescue Jimmy too. Slim locks eyes with Mrs. Livingston, who happens to be his old love Wildfire. Turns out all of them are driving on a plane's runway. A plane takes off and Jimmy gets on board with an old pilot. They fly to Niagara Falls, but the plane crashes, making Jimmy fall into the waterfall. Thankfully, his bubble doesn't let him drown. He somehow manages to get out of the water and rushes his way to the wedding. Chloe and Mark are in the chapel, saying their vows, when Jimmy enters the church, claiming his love for her. Seeing this as his last chance to persuade Chloe, he puts his life in danger and tears his bubble open to kiss her. However, just after it, he falls unconscious. As Chloe tries to wake him up, Mr. and Mrs. Livingston arrive there too. Mrs. Livingston mourns her son's death when Mr. Livingston asks her to tell everyone the truth. Mrs. Livingston embarrassingly reveals that Jimmy doesn't have any condition, and he suddenly wakes up. It turns out that she had lied to him to keep him away from the evils of the world for all these years. Jimmy is shocked but forgives his mother when she claims she did it to protect him. He finally embraces Chloe as everyone claps. Cut to a few months later. Chloe and Jimmy are getting married. Everyone he met during his journey is at the wedding. Mr. Livingston, Mrs. Livingston, and Slim are now a throuple. We can see Jimmy and Chloe drive away in a car on their honeymoon, and so the movie ends. Help us grow this channel. Subscribe for more videos every day, turn on notifications and leave a like and a comment. Thank you for watching. See you at the next one.